Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a decade that, well, really shook things up for Hispanic-Americans. The 1990s.
Yeah, the 90s. Definitely a turning point, but also a lot of challenges that continued, really, that are still around today.
It's kind of a mixed bag, right? And we're using this great piece by Mr. Hutchings History to break it all down.
Yeah, Mr. Hutchings, he really gets into the nitty-gritty, the activism, the political scene, even some of the internal struggles within the Hispanic-American community itself.
Right, exactly. We're going to see those internal divisions, which I think is something that people don't always talk about.
Exactly. But it's important because it shows, I think, how complex the Hispanic-American experience really is.
So let's jump right into it. I think we have to start with Proposition 187 in California. This was 1994.
Oh, yeah, Proc 187, a real flashpoint.
It tried to deny undocumented immigrants access to public services, schools, healthcare, you name it.
Huge backlash, of course. And it was eventually ruled unconstitutional.
But it really woke people up.
It mobilized Hispanic communities in a way we, I think, hadn't really seen before.
Exactly. And there were these organizations like SVREP, they focus on voter registration, and then LLDF, which provides legal advocacy.
They were already doing great work, but Prop 187 really kicked things into overdrive.
And you see the results.
Yeah.
Voter turnout among Hispanic Americans, it just surged.
Yeah, there was this energy, this feeling that, okay, we need to make our voices heard.
And it wasn't just about voting either, was it? This was also a time when the labor movement was having this, resurgence.
Definitely. And you see a lot of overlap, a lot of Latino workers really driving that resurgence.
And you had unions like SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, and the Health and Hospital Workers Union in New York.
Huge growth in membership. And a lot of that growth was coming from Latino immigrant workers.
Right. And these were folks working in all sorts of industries, right? Construction, healthcare, hospitality.
Yeah. Industries where, let's be honest, working conditions could be tough.
So unions gave them a platform, a way to fight for better wages, better treatment.
Collective bargaining, that's the key. Strength in numbers.
And we saw some really powerful examples of that, like the hotel workers in Los Angeles. They came together, they demanded fair wages, and they won.
It was a real victory, and it showed, what's possible when people organize.
And on the national stage, you had figures like Linda Chavez Thompson. She became the first Latina vice president of the AFL-CIO.
That was in 1995. Huge moment. It showed how Latinos were rising within the labor movement. Their voices were being heard.
Okay, so we've got this surge in political activism. We've got the labor movement gaining steam. But there's this other piece of the puzzle that really starts to fall into place in the 90s, Hispanic political representation.
Yeah, that's when you see some real breakthroughs. I mean, the numbers are pretty incredible.
Lay it on us. What kind of numbers are we talking about?
Back in 1973, you had about 1,400 Hispanic elected officials across the entire U.S. By 1994, that number had jumped to over 5,400.
Wow. That's more than, tripled.
More than tripled. And think about this. By the year 2000, Latinos held 25% of the seats in California's state assembly.
That's real political power.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just at the state level. You see figures like Bob Menendez and Ken Salazar rising in the U.S. Senate.
Even President Clinton was making a point of appointing more Hispanics to his cabinet, his administration.
Right. There was this growing recognition of the Hispanic communities, their political clout. They were a force to be reckoned with.
So things are moving. Right, there's progress. But we also have to remember, this was happening while a new wave of activism was emerging from a different part of the Hispanic community, Central American immigrants.
Right, Central American immigrants. They were coming to the U.S. in huge numbers in the 80s and 90s, and they brought with them, a different set of experiences, a different set of concerns.
They were facing their own unique challenges.
Right, exactly. I mean, initially, groups like Casa Nicaragua, they were focused on opposing U.S. foreign policy in Central America. They wanted to stop U.S. intervention in the region.
So their activism, at least at first, was more outward-looking.
Right, it was about what was happening back home. But as the 90s went on, their focus shifted. It became more about domestic issues.
So what changed?
Well, you had organizations like SALPAC forming. They were focused on things like voter registration, supporting pro-immigrant candidates. They even managed to influence some of the deportation measures in the 1996 Immigration Act.
So they were fighting on two fronts, against U.S. policies abroad and for their rights here at home.
Exactly. And, this period also saw some tension between Mexican-American and Central American communities.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier, like in Los
Yeah.
Angeles, right?
It was tough. Different groups, different needs, different priorities. It highlighted the complexities of creating a unified Hispanic-American identity.
It's that idea of unity within diversity. It's a constant struggle, right? Figuring out how to come together while still honoring those differences.
It's a work in progress, for sure, but I think it's an important conversation to have.
Okay, so we've talked about the progress, but I think we need to be honest about the challenges too, because despite all the advancements we've seen, a lot of those challenges remained very real for Hispanic Americans in the 1990s.
Absolutely. And I think understanding those challenges is key to understanding the full picture of the 90s. It wasn't all sunshine and roses. There were still some very real obstacles.
It's like we're seeing this incredible surge in energy, activism, political engagement. But then, you look at some of the underlying issues, and those haven't really gone away.
Yeah, it's this push and pull, right?
Right.
Progress and then setbacks. And some things just seem to stay the same.
And I think one of the biggest things that changed the game, really shifted everything, was 9/11.
Oh yeah, 9/11. Everything changed after 9/11.
The whole conversation around immigration, it took on this whole new, intensity.
Border security became the top priority.
Right. And suddenly, it was less about pathways to citizenship and more about enforcement, deportation.
The Patriot Act, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, all of these things, they had a huge impact on Latino communities.
Yeah.
Especially those with, undocumented members.
And it's almost like the progress made in the 90s, all that visibility, all that political mobilization, it kind of backfired in a way.
Yeah.
Because it made these communities, more of a target.
Yeah. There was this sense that, immigrants were somehow, a threat.
And that led to some pretty harsh policies, like Arizona's SB 1070.
Oh, yeah. SB 1070, that was a big one. Basically, it gave local police the power to, check anyone's immigration status.
Based on, reasonable suspicion.
Right, which a lot of times just meant racial profiling.
And who do you think got stopped and questioned the most?
It was definitely Hispanic communities who bore the brunt of it.
But, it also sparked a whole new wave of activism.
Oh, absolutely. Huge protests, legal challenges, boycotts. People were fighting back.
And it wasn't just about immigration anymore. It was like this broader awakening, right?
It was about education reform, healthcare access, criminal justice reform, even environmental justice. All of these things were coming together.
And then you had the dreamers, these young people, brought to the U.S. as kids. Undocumented, but, they grew up here, went to school here, worked here. This is their home.
And they were fighting for the right to stay, to be recognized,
Their stories were so powerful, they really humanized the whole immigration debate.
Yeah, they forced people to see, the real people behind the labels, the stereotypes.
And at the same time, you've got this other thing happening. Latinos are becoming, a major political force, a voting bloc.
The demographics were shifting, the Hispanic population was growing rapidly, and politicians, they couldn't ignore that.
They finally had to start paying attention to the issues that mattered to Latino voters.
And you see both Democrats and Republicans actively courting the Latino vote.
So it's not just about protesting anymore, right? It's about being at the table, having a seat at the table.
It's about shaping policy, influencing the decisions that affect their lives.
But it's also important to remember, the Latino vote, it's not monolithic. It's diverse.
Absolutely. Different national origins, different generations, different political views.
There's not enough to just say, we need to get the Hispanic vote. You have to actually engage with the complexity of it all.
Exactly. It's about understanding the nuances, the different priorities, the different concerns.
And that's something that's, it's still evolving today. It's an ongoing conversation.
For sure. And I think as we look at how the 90s shaped the Hispanic-American experience in the 21st century, it's clear that this struggle for equality, for representation, it's far from over.
There's still work to be done. But it feels like, in a lot of ways, the groundwork was laid in the 90s.
It was a decade of awakening, of mobilization, of planting seeds, and now we're seeing those seeds, start to blossom.
So where do we go from here? What are some of the key battles that are still being fought today?
Well, I think in our final part, we need to delve into what these fights look like now, from the halls of power to the streets. and explore what the future might hold for this, well, this vibrant and ever-evolving community.
So we're talking about the future of Hispanic America, but it feels like some of these battles, they've been going on for, well, for decades.
Yeah, some of these issues, they keep coming back around.
Like immigration reform. It's this constant, like, back and forth.
Comprehensive immigration reform. It's been the goal for so long, and yet here we are still fighting for it.
It feels like every time we get close, something happens. Some new law, some new policy, some new political shift.
It's a moving target, for sure.
But, one thing that feels different now is that, well, it's not just about reacting anymore. Hispanic communities are really driving the conversation.
They're leading the charge, setting the agenda.
And it's not just the same organizations, the same faces.
You've got this new generation of activists, groups like United We Dream, Mi Gente. They're bringing a whole new energy, a whole new approach.
Yeah, it's a different kind of activism. They're using social media, building coalitions. It's very, like, interconnected.
They're savvy. They know how to get their message out there, how to build momentum.
And the issues, they've expanded too. It's not just about immigration anymore.
It's about economic justice, racial justice, climate justice. All of these things are intertwined.
Right, it's that intersectional approach, like recognizing that all of these things, they affect each other.
Exactly. It's about seeing the bigger picture and understanding how all of these issues impact Hispanic communities.
And that brings us back to representation, doesn't it? We talked about the gains made in the 90s, but have things really changed that much?
There's been progress. The number of Hispanic elected officials, it's definitely gone up, but it's still not proportional to their share of the population.
And when you look at the highest levels of government, well, the Supreme Court, the presidency.
Yeah, the representation there it's still pretty lacking.
It's that glass ceiling. It's still there.
It's tough to break through. But the fight continues.
And it's not just about electing more Hispanic officials.
Yeah.
It's about changing the system itself.
It's about reforming the judiciary, diversifying the courts, making sure that the policies being made, that they actually reflect the needs of all communities.
It's about equity, about making sure everyone has a fair shot.
Exactly. And I think, when we talk about the future of Hispanic America, that's what it comes down to.
It's about justice.
Yeah.
About equality. About opportunity.
And it's about recognizing the contributions that Hispanic Americans have made and continue to make to this country.
Their stories, their culture, their values.
It's all part of the fabric of America.
And I think, after taking this deep dive, it's clear that the 1990s, it was a turning point. But the journey is far from over.
It's a journey that's still unfolding. And it's a journey that we all need to be a part of.
So to everyone listening, keep learning, keep engaging, and keep pushing for a more just and equitable future.
Because the fight for Hispanic America is, it's a fight for all of us.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.